All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Malware Prevention and Remediation for IBMI with Steve Pitcher. Steve is one of our sales consultants and security engineers, as well as one of our IBM champions here at Service Express. If you have questions for Steve during the session, please put them in the Q&A tab on the right. We'll go through as many as we can at the end of the session. If we don't get to your question, we'll add it to the list for the live Q&A at the end of day 2. For other questions, please use the chat function as that is available to all participants. And with that, I will hand it off to Steve.
Thank you, Brooke. Hey, everybody. Let me just pull this up here. Come on. 2 different screens here. So this is malware prevention and remediation for IBMI. I literally, in the last 24 hours, just completed a malware remediation and investigation. So this is quite fresh in my mind in terms of practical application of my own advice, I suppose. So it makes it easier to remember. Anyways, we're going to talk about malware, ransomware. We're going to talk about how to limit your risk, or at least reduce your risk to a reasonable level. And in the event that you do get a breach from a malware or ransomware attack, you know what to do, who to call, what not to do more specifically, and how to try to get out of there with, I suppose, as much or as least damage as possible. Ideally, you want to come out of this thing unscathed, and not everybody gets to claim that. So, without further ado, we're going to get into a couple of things. I'm a big fan of putting out little surveys, mini surveys, and I do this on LinkedIn, Twitter, or whatever, and just polling the general community just to get a feel for the pulse of what's going on out there. So I put this out a couple of years ago, saying, how secure are your IBMI partitions? Most people think, yeah, it's pretty good. 15% are actively lying to themselves by saying it's totally bulletproof. I've yet to see a bulletproof machine. However, I've seen 2 partitions by the same customer, which I would argue is probably the best I've ever seen. And I know she's attending because she's asked a couple of questions earlier. So you know who you are. You do a pretty darn good job. And it's good to see that you're back again. Pretty good and fair, I would argue, basically means the same thing. It's like, yeah, I think we're doing okay. That to me tells me that you really don't know how you're doing, I would argue. So maybe the majority, the 85% who say, pretty good, fair, I would probably cut that half and half. Those who think, yeah, we do a pretty good job at securing our systems. The other side are more in the, yeah, I think it's doing okay, which probably is not. 0% saying it's not wide open. I would argue that that's 100% false. It's statistically higher than 0. I can show you some. I may have a slide later on in this presentation. If I don't, I will describe it in detail. But it's a net server one. Hell, I'll describe it now. There is an IBMI partition in the wild right now where if you browse to it by way of Windows Explorer, through the IP address, you will get to the root directory. And it will not challenge you for a username and password because there's a guest profile in use. What does that mean? We'll get to it. Either way, I'm surprised that machine hasn't been torn apart yet. I haven't checked in a while, but it is out there, and I don't know who the customer is. It's not my business to go in and poke around. I just know that you can if you wanted to. I won't show you how or tell you where it is, but that's at least one, and I've seen many others very similarly set up. Another one would be, is your IBMI prepared to withstand a malware attack? People would say absolutely 100% covered. I would argue it's probably not 100% covered. You're probably doing a relatively good job. However, there is no 100% covered unless net server is off and you're not running Samba. If those 2 things are, running on your system, you're not 100% covered. There is no 100%. I think that the last two, not really, no way, that's relatively the majority of what systems are really like, based on what we find doing security assessments, what we find doing penetration tests. The majority of the systems that we look at and we literally break into, it doesn't take too much effort from me at all to do that. And we may go into that just a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about hubris. Okay. I'm not going to read all this out to you, but what's the gist of this? This was something I saw on Facebook, I don't know, 2 years ago, maybe. And this conversation, I wanted to just, reach out and smack the guy because he's just giving a lot of people some bad advice. Effectively talking about a piece of malicious code and the damage it could cause. He's saying it's impossible. The base operating system will be fine. You will not lose the operating system. You will not, you will be able to IPL, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, well, I hosed a system last week. We built a system and destroyed it. And just FYI, you're not correct. What he said next was just interesting. I'll read this part out. The whole system should not be affected. Whatever thing, Coupadon can affect maybe the IFS file system. The IFS file system where you have PC type files or have a server environment running Windows or Linux on it, but the base OS should not be affected. Blah, 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 blah. He is provably and inexcusably false on that. So what is the IFS, the integrated file system? The guy has a fundamental misunderstanding of what the IFS actually is. People think, well, yeah, it's just where I put my, spreadsheets and things like that. Sure, that's where you put your spreadsheets. You can also put your spreadsheets in QDLS, and that's a different file system altogether. The IFS is actually a file system made up of, roughly speaking, 10 different file systems. Okay. It's called the integrated file system because they are all integrated. That's what the I in IBM I stands for, what the I in I series stood for 24 years ago when they created that machine. So the integrated file system is composed of, your root file system, QOpenSys, qsys.lib, that's your traditional library file system, where your RPG programs and COBOL programs run, things like that. Your QDLS file system, that's your documents and folders from way back in the Office Vision days. Still in use by many ERP systems out there, but it is its own file system in and of itself. QOpt, where you mount a DVD, that's still a file system. All of this is the IFS, all of it. And that's the cool thing about IBMI is that they're all integrated. It's also a critical problem if it's not properly protected. So when the guy says, hey, just the IFS, it could be affected. Well, the IFS is the whole darn thing. So we'll go through a couple of things here. Perception. Our file shares are safe. They're on the AS400. No, they're not. Number one, they're not on the AS400. If you got an AS400, I want to see it. But the reality is it's not on the AS400 and they are not safe. Okay. Thinking that they are properly protected just because they're on the 400 doesn't mean anything to me. I kick those weak, security doors down all day long. And if you're putting your AS400 against anybody with Google and a couple of hours, just banking on the system to by default save your butt, it ain't going to happen. Okay. By default, IFS security on the root is star public star read write execute. That means change authority. Okay. If you have a guest profile in NetServer, meaning that any user who accesses a file share resource will not be challenged for credentials. That's a huge problem. If you have users with excess or users with excess users with IO sysconfig and all object or all object, that's a problem. If you are sharing critical directories like root, QOpenSys, QDLS even is a critical directory, you may have problems. You can only have high risk and low risk. So we put this to the test. Nathan Williams and I, my coworker, who's also speaking here today, we actually did this. We did this a couple of years ago, just for the sake of doing it. We also did this live at WMCPA in front of maybe 100 people. It was good fun. We had a great time. And but back then, I wanted to prove a point to this cat. So this is why we didn't. This is why we did. We built an IBM partition called Wile E. Coyote. That's Nathan's name because he has a sense of humor like I do. And we created two user profiles, one called weak user and one called all object user. Guess which one has all object? It's not the weak user. So I then created some custom malware. No, I will not share it with you. It will attach to a mounted drive, and it effectively does recursive object deletions. It's not difficult. Why am I not encrypting? It's because I don't want to spend the time encrypting things. It's just going to take time for me. So I just wanted to take a gauge of how much damage you can actually do. So we created a root directory, mounted the weak user credentials to that directory, and ran the malware on that root directory share. So for Wile E. Coyote, weak user is a standard IBM user. No special authorities, nothing special at all about that user. Wasn't a member of a group. This partition was net new and very vanilla. So after a little while of trying to chew up that system, PACE was an error status. That's your operating system option 33. 40,000-ish objects in PACE were destroyed. The system was workable, but not so much workable. Think about what PACE facilitates. So PACE was invented in what, 94, give or take, if I remember correctly. PACE, I would argue, is the best thing to happen to the AS400 at the time, and probably the most open way of, or sorry, how do I say this? It's probably the single most important thing to open the operating system to modern standards, and continues to do so. PACE facilitates Java, every open source utility you have on the system. If you're running Python or Ruby or I don't know, Perl or SSH, if you're running anything other than standard RPG display files, commands, things like that live in QSys, anything outside of that, PACE facilitates every step of the way. So if I'm going to kneecap PACE, I am going to cause a decent amount of pain on a system. This is a non-privileged user, by the way. So after that, we said, well, let's just, take the system with the all object user and see what happens with it. What can we destroy with a user with all object and a map drive? We know because we clean it up all the time. We do bare metal recoveries to systems that have been affected by a ransomware attack by a user, inadvertently, of course, with a map drive to the root directory. So we mounted it up, let it rip. We did not clean up the damage that weak user caused. There's no point, because if weak user destroys or destroyed it, you can bet your bottom dollar that all object user is going to do it. So after running, roughly speaking, 20 minutes, couldn't get on with Telnet, couldn't get to a console. SMB was up. That's the only thing that was actually in use at the time. So, hey, I'm using the SMB server. I'm using that server. I'm pounding it repeatedly with, hits. So yeah, all the net server objects, at least the important ones, are locked. Navigators destroyed, FTPs destroyed, SSH destroyed. There is no systems management capabilities whatsoever on the server that we tested in a very controlled environment. So yeah, you will cause trouble. At that point, we decided to do an IPL. So we got an attention light right away. Your B937FF, which if you look up in the IBM manual, kind of means that you are star screwed. You are not going to be able to boot that machine. Partitions destroyed. Of course, we flash that in advance so we can just bring it back in a matter of seconds, which was, if you want to talk to Nate about something cool, talk to him about that today. That was fun. We were destroying and flashing partitions, live on stage. It was good fun. So it really highlights what you can do to bring something back. If something is destroyed like that, yeah, you can bring it to your last flashpoint for sure. You just have to make sure it's a recent flashpoint. A flashpoint from 9 months ago isn't going to do you too much. But for the average shop, you'll have to reload your OS from tape. So that's what all object can do. So don't be this cat. Okay, assume that your system is not going to stand up if you have an all object problem, if you have a guest user profile. If you have a guest user profile with all object, that's even worse. That's just we see it from time to time. I alluded to that at the beginning of this. So don't be that cat. Skepticism is your best asset. So, and I will mention something here. I said this to somebody the other day and they kind of laughed, but we were on doing a security assessment for a company. They usually we do this in a way where we're doing the driving, we're running SQL in a system, trying to get as much information as possible. This was a little different. We were doing kind of smart hands. We weren't allowed to take data off site, so we were taking some screenshots and things like that. And it was a bit of a long, arduous process. And we were having a kind of a fun conversation where the person on the other end said that you really, you kind of enjoy saying things point blank. You don't pull punches. And I said, no, I don't mind telling you that your baby is ugly. The one thing that a third party assessment will buy you, and I don't care who you get the assessment from, but there's one thing that third parties have that customers have zero, and that's bias. Okay. Or customers have too much of. We have none of it. We do not have any bias when it comes to your system. So I will look at your system with a fresh eye and no attachment to a program I wrote in 1994 that was really cool, or my sign-on screen that for Christmas I put a Christmas tree there, and and I'm all proud of that. I don't care about any of that. That's all well and good for you, but when it comes to your system, I'm looking at an unbiased, I would argue, an unbiased and definitely frank perspective. I'm going to tell you where the warts are. I'm going to tell you how ugly the baby is, because it's not my baby. So reiterating some of this stuff, all and any of critical file shares, guest profiles, rampant all object special authorities, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Let's talk about some of these critical file shares. So any file share I would deem critical if it's sharing IBM's objects, which would be /QIBM, QDLS, QOpenSys, for instance. QIBM, you might say, why the heck is QIBM shared? What's in QIBM? Well, a lot is in QIBM. And I actually found that bug a few years ago, where I kept finding QIBM out there doing security assessments. And I reached out to IBM and said, hey, why is QIBM showing up everywhere? You guys wouldn't have been, dumb enough to put a share out there to QIBM. And they said, absolutely not. And then they went and checked and said, yeah, somebody in the Access for Windows team put that share out there a few years ago. And they PTF'd that sucker back to 7.1. That's how long that's been out there, to 7.1. Maybe even before that, because back then 7.1 was still supported or still on extended support or a service extension. So they were still writing patches for it. It's certainly possible. I haven't seen a 5.4 or a 6.1 system in a little while, but I may have a peek just to see if a QIBM share is out there, because goodness knows how long it's there. Anyways, yes, IBM does make mistakes and they PTF'd it. So if you're not PTFing your systems and you haven't in a few years, you may still have that out there. Turn it off. These are IBM objects, not necessarily yours, although there is a user section or a user data section directory underneath QIBM, which is technically your data. If you have WebSphere, stuff is underneath that for sure. And you may want to be very careful for sharing anything like that. Critical file shares that also share customer information that would be deemed very sensitive, I would argue things like payroll, EDI, sales information, human resources, whatever. If that stuff is shared, that's critical. It best be properly protected. Or you look at a combination of both. QSys.lib, that's IBM's and it's yours. So they put their IBM libraries in there. They all begin with Q. You put your libraries in there, call them EDI and payroll or pay test or whatever. That's the QSys file system. It can be accessed by way of, work link or, your standard work lib, work object. The root is there as well. That's IBM's. That's also yours. When you create a directory off the root, that's your directory. IBM's directory for, I don't know, Q Open System, Q IBM, that's theirs. So everything on the system is underneath the root. That is the top of the pyramid, and everything else fans out from that. So you're depending on a couple of things here to really save you. I would argue that for things that are shared, what we've seen, you need to have a proper authority scheme in place. So very few amount of super users. Super users do not get map drives. Okay. Number two, proper object authority as well for the objects you are sharing. So if you're sharing a /payroll directory, that best be shared with, star public, star exclude, and only allowing appropriate people in there. As well, a comprehensive and tested backup. If you see somebody who is not a public company, okay, somebody doesn't have to declare it. Tom and Joe's Trucking somewhere gets, they get breached with ransomware and they have to pay the bill. They might put a press release out. They might say, yeah, we got hacked, whatever. They usually, they're not bound by law to announce that. They're usually in that position because they could not recover. Not because they were legally obligated to announce that they were breached, but they had no other recourse. They had to pay the ransom because they had no backup. They could not recover. They didn't have a good comprehensive backup and they could not recover. So understanding the threats in terms of ransomware, where does it come from? In an organization, it comes from a whole bunch of places: phishing, software vulnerabilities, RDP for Windows systems, and so on and so forth. You ideally should be patching your systems, testing them, having anti-malware on them, training users, et cetera, et cetera. In terms of IBM I, or terms of a ransomware attack, it's usually an inadvertent user-initiated event. Somebody initiates something, it pulls down a payload, and it scoots out looking for anything that can access from that user position on a laptop or a PC. A network attached asset on the customer's end. And it will try to do as much damage as possible, either by encrypting the data or flat out destroying it. One or the other. It doesn't play nicely. What are your recourse? Well, you got a couple of them. I mentioned the proper authority and whatnot. Those are proactive solutions. I'm a big fan of that. Anti-malware solutions. There are a number of them out there in the market. There are two specifically for IBM I. We kind of lead with Fortra. They're a good partner of ours, and I would argue they have an excellent product that works very well for this. How does it work? Well, I would also mention you could try to roll your own. I've done it. It's not too difficult on how to do it. Think about it. What does it work? Exit point programs. Okay, so any utility used to try to protect a network share is using exit points to track object opens and closes. So if I have an exit point program in place, okay, it can be counting the amount of objects that are changed or deleted. What happens with a piece of ransomware? Well, it's going to find an object. It's going to copy the object, encrypt the object, delete the old object. So what you're looking for is changes, deletions. And if you have a certain amount within a certain time frame, those are your two thresholds. It can be very simple. Then you can take an action. End net server, ban the IP address, write a message to the system operator queue. I don't care. You can do something, and prepackaged solutions will do that for you out of the can. They're polished, they're nice, but it's not rocket surgery on how this stuff is put together. They do wrap some cool stuff in there. You know, one of them has a recycle bin. That's kind of neat. I built one too. It didn't take much. If I can write it, anybody can write it. So build or buy, you know, your choice, whatever you want to do. If you have the resources to build it, go for it. If not, buy it. I've had this conversation 3 times in the last week with customers where they say, you know, they're in a predicament where, you know, they want to protect their eye. However, they don't want to spend the money to do it. Why not? You put antiviral solutions on everything, every other asset in your environment. And now you're talking about wanting to put your IBM I on a different VLAN, not allowing SMB traffic to it, although SMB, you know, there is a business function that requires SMB. And this is when the network engineer is saying, well, Telnet's kind of, you know, that's kind of dangerous. We should be locking down Telnet on this VLAN. So it's people who have a fundamental misunderstanding or a fundamental ignorance of how IBM I is accessed and works. It is often the most important server in a data center, and you're having people trying to come up with weird, funky solutions to protect it by shutting communications off to your most important server. It's bloody ridiculous. Spend the time or spend the money to protect your asset. It is a reactive solution. Okay. It's watching for events, watching for changes. You will lose some stuff. You're just not going to use a lot of it. So let's just say you're going to prevent against, or you're watching for any more than 500 deletions within a minute on the IFS, or on a file share rather. Okay, fair enough. You'll lose those 500 objects. It's better than losing, you know, 5 billion objects, right? 500, that's recoverable. A root directory share, I have never done a count of objects on the underneath root on IBM I, like a vanilla IBM I. I should, just for the sake of, you know, seeing what it is. Let's just call it a billion. Let's just say it's a billion objects. Okay, you're not going to lose a billion. You're going to lose 500. That's workable. You'll walk away from that. I like user education as well. You know, training users not to do dumb stuff like, you know, clicking on a link and providing, you know, personal identifiable information, you know, looking at who's it from, is it a valid domain? This is all IT security 101. Absolutely go for it. But if you're depending on users to make the right call from a security perspective, okay. Not saying don't train them, but use that to just limit your risk from that angle. Even if you limit it by 30%, it's still something. People do make mistakes. We're human beings. You know, you talk to evolutionary biologists. We are anywhere between 150,000 years old to 250,000 years old on this planet as Homo sapiens. You know, it shows. Well, we make dumb mistakes. This is why we put, you know, do not drink on bleach and, you know, Javex and things like that. It's because people do make silly mistakes. So just be wary when you're training users. Don't think of that as your be all and end all. It's just one more tool in your arsenal. Reducing your blast radius. If I had a stone tablet, Steve Stone tablets of what to do to harden net server, harden your file and print sharing, it would be only share what you must and properly protect what you share. Period. Those are the 2 things. So if you have 65 file shares on your IBM I, okay, what are they? What are they used for? Who needs access to them? And start there. If you determine, well, I have 65 file shares, I only really need to share 20 of them. Then only share 20 of them. Remove the other 45 shares. Now you have something a little bit more consumable, something you can wrap your arms around a little bit. Determine which ones are the most important that you need to share or protect, or sorry, that you need to protect. So determining what the worst things to have destroyed would be is paramount. Those are the first ones you want to put a plan to protect in. So proper object security there, limiting your IO/sysconfig special authority. That'll ensure people cannot create file shares. IO/sysconfig, if you ask, you know, 10 average IBM I admins, what does IO/sysconfig allow me to do? I'll bet you a cup of coffee they will not have a clue, or they'll give you a convoluted answer that doesn't mean anything. Most people have no idea what it does. One thing that it does is allow you to create file shares. So limit that. In terms of all object special authority, you need to get to a point where we don't have many people with all object special authority, or they're not elevating their authority either. Guest profile support has got to go away as well. Talking about a comprehensive and tested backup recovery plan, I don't put Richie here because he's the handsomer of the two people here. I'm putting him here because he has a great reminder of understanding what you have on a tape. Okay, this comes from a customer of mine who when I joined this group in 2017, I called this guy for 2 years. Not Richie, but the customer. Called this customer for 2 years saying, hey, I know you got a little 525 there. You should give me a call back because this thing is, old. You don't have any maintenance on it. Like, you want to protect this thing. And after 2 years, he finally called me back when the system died. They had 2 disk drives, one mirrored to the other. Both are dead. Backplane's dead. Tape drive's dead. Everything's dead. They must have had a hell of a power event. Whatever happened, the machine was not bootable. IBM Canada, their Canadian customer, came in and ballparked the replacement of all the parts with no maintenance contract to be, roughly speaking, $25,000. Okay, so we went to the cloud, our cloud to be specific, and I said, guys, whatever you got there for tapes, find your last full system save. They had one labeled full system save that had a grand total of 4 libraries on it. 4. They had 2 other tapes. One was blank and unreadable. I think Larry had a look at it, and you could see through the darn tape. It was that old. They had 3 tapes total. They would just rotate them. The third tape they sent was the only usable one. It had everything but, so it had evidence of doing a save config, save sec data. So I had my user profiles, I had my security information, I had my configuration, my save live all user, my save DLO. The only thing they didn't have was a SAV command, saving, effectively your stream files. Luckily, it was a very, call it a heritage kind of a shop where they didn't do much outside of QSYS and QDLS. So did they need it? No, I got most of the system. We were able to recover it. They dodged one hell of a bullet. But this is just a good example of not knowing what you're backing up, not testing your recoveries, and thinking you have a full system save when you do not have a full system save. There was no like an OS, no licensed internal code, no operating system. We used licensed internal code and operating system for 7.3 to bring them back to where it was actually usable in our cloud. Be wary of high availability solutions. I'm a big fan of HA solutions. I don't care what you have, Mimix, Itera, Power HA, whatever. That's great. But if you're relying on your HA to save you from a ransomware attack or a malware attack, guess what happens to your HA box when you run some hefty malware on the root directory of your system? It's going to start deleting everything, right? And encrypting everything. Guess what's going to happen on the target side, right? So point-in-time backups are paramount. Make sure that you're backing up things regularly. Make sure you're getting the right type of backups in terms of save 21, at least, every time you do something very invasive, you put a new OS on, get a backup afterwards, get a backup beforehand. You put PTFs on, get a backup beforehand, a backup afterwards after you perm applied them. These are important checkpoints. And then every single night, get as much user data as possible. If you have flash copy and external storage, flash those things. Get yourself, images that you can use and replicate those or put those to tape and send them off site somewhere. And if you are only depending on your HA to save you, you'd better hope whoever created your HA configuration made a big boo-boo and it's not doing what it should be doing. Otherwise, it's going to destroy the other system too. So make sure you have your point-in-time backups. Couple of stats here. I'm not going to go, through this stuff. Just say we see a lot of bad stuff. Sticking with the breach stuff, critical file shares. All right, let's have a look at this. What's a read-only versus a read-write share? Well, it's one thing you want to know about. If you're looking at your list of file shares, you will see an access column. It'll say read, or it'll say read-write, or read-only, or read-write. The ones that say read-write are actionable by NetServer. You can change, you can delete. If you have a read-only directory that's been shared, or sorry, a directory that's been shared in a read-only fashion. This has nothing to do with permissions. This has to do with the ability to change something or not change something. So a read-only share of, say, your payroll directory, you will not have the ability to destroy any information. You will, however, be at risk of data theft. That's a problem. So understanding from a damage perspective, yes, if all of your file shares are read-only, sure, you can't have damage through a malware attack on your IBM. You might have the root shared in a read-only fashion. Okay, that's better, I guess. But it's still not good, because if you want to rely on your standard object authority to protect you, go ahead, see how that works. But just be wary. There's two types of shares, and you need to know what your risk is for damage. In terms of what we see here, you want to have star public, star exclude, and only allow the people that you want into a directory as much as possible. Now, the nice thing, I mentioned authority collection for objects. In my initial presentation this morning, Rapid Fire Admin, I've also put out some code out there. If you have file shares, you can determine what users are hitting your NetServer shares. So at least you can understand who's looking at them. Sure, you can right-click a share and hit properties, and then you can see the sessions that are open. That's a tough way to get the information. You can use authority collection to determine who's using them, and then reduce that risk, reducing your blast radius by going to those users and saying, hey, we understand you've got a map drive to the root of our operating system. That's going away, sir. So why don't you tell us where you go when you get in there? Authority collection will tell you this, but conversation never hurts either. And they said, well, I go 6 levels deep and I put a spreadsheet in this folder every Tuesday. Okay, great. We're going to give you a direct share to that folder, and we're going to remove the all object share on the system. So you do that enough, you can eventually get rid of that root directory share. Ideally, that's what you want to do. Now, be very careful as well, because the root directory ships at star public read write execute. So if you create a directory off the root with root set it here, it's going to inherit that star public read write execute. So if you've got directories for whatever application you installed, chances are that's still star public read write execute, all the way down. If you come into your shares in Navigator, you can right click and hit permissions. This will give you the permissions of the underlying directory that has been shared. So it's important to know how that looks and how that's set up. I would not advise doing star public exclude on the root directory if you have a root share, or even if you don't have a root share. You're going to see everything stop to a grinding halt if you do that. So don't do that. The lowest you can bring root is star public read execute. You cannot do star public exclude on the root. I've seen that before. Oh, and by the way, if you do remove your root directory share once you've done the work, don't send me an email and say, I tried to remove the root directory and now I'm having a lot of problems. I'm talking about removing the share, stopping the share. Right click the root share and click stop sharing. I'm not talking about putting a 4 on the root directory. And every presentation I do on this, I always get one who attempts to do it, or they get scared and they say, should I really do this? No, you should not. Do not put a 4 on root and let it rip. Especially if your command defaults for removing subdirectory star all. You're gonna have a bad Tuesday, and that's not what you want to do. Stop sharing, not destroy the directory. What are guest profiles? Well, I kind of alluded to this earlier. So in NetServer, you can go in your NetServer configuration, and you can go to the security vertical tab. And I think I got on the next page, or there it is right here. I'll go back. But this is where your guest server ID lives. If this is blank, great. Okay. This is where you want to see it. You want to see nothing there. If you see something other than blank, then you have a guest profile in use. Depending on your Windows configuration, your network configuration, things like that, it may prevent it from being used, but I still don't like it there. Now, what does it do? Well, it basically says if you don't have credentials to IBM I when you try to mount IBM I shares, we're going to provide you those authorities by way of a guest profile for you. So you're never prompted with credentials, and you can get in there and operate underneath the guest profile name. The nice thing is that if a user profile has all object authority and you try to assign it as a guest user profile, it will not allow that to happen. It says, hey, this guy's got all object. You're not putting him in here as a guest user ID. However, the corollary of that, if you put a user ID and call the user profile Bill. All right, so the guest profile's name is Bill. You create a user profile called Bill, put in here, restart net server. Bill's now your guest user ID. Perfect. Now you can go and give it all object. That's not a good thing. You don't want that to happen. So make sure when you check this, if you've got a guest profile in use, know what your risk is and see if that guy's got some special authorities or not. Okay. That's all I really have to say about guest profiles. Be very careful. I went through all of this. So what do you do when you have a problem? You can call me if you'd like, but these are 5 or 6 steps that you're going to want to look at for sure and understand. I mentioned we had a customer who had a ransomware attack on Saturday. I didn't find out until Monday, so I couldn't pass on some good advice. If you are in a pickle, do not be afraid to shoot me an email, give me a phone call, smoke signal, carrier pigeon. I don't care. Try to get a hold of me and I will help you. We will help you to ensure that you are not as effective as you or affected as you could be. So the first thing you need to know, you suspect you're underneath an attack, and you'll usually see this with different kind of behaviors on the system. Users might see files with different extensions on them, or hey, I can't open up this file. When I do, it's all gobbledygook. It's all scrambled. I don't know what it says. Okay, well, that's your sign. You're probably underneath an attack right now, and you need to shut it down. So what can you do? Well, if you know they're coming in through a particular share, you can always stop sharing that particular directory. However, it doesn't mean that other people are not affected by the ransomware and will start attacking those directories either. So you may want to do yourself a big favor and kill net server immediately. So NTCP server, star net server, shut down your file and print sharing on your IBM I, and as well on any other SMB server in your environment. That will at least halt the ransomware attack from doing any more damage. And that's definitely one of the actions of any of the third-party anti-ransomware solutions. They will spot this type of traffic and they will shut down that server as one of their options that you can take. Next step. Okay, now we know we're under attack. We know we've prevented the attack from getting any worse. Let's get the backup tape loaded in, or your media rather, loaded into the system, or loaded into your tape drive or your virtual tape drive. Note, I'm not saying go find your backup tapes. There is no finding your backup tapes. You know where your backup tapes are. You do regular disaster recovery tests, don't you? You check and see if your last save 21 is readable. Or if your last save 21 is on 1/4-inch tape sitting on a shelf somewhere and the data is literally sliding off the side of the tape. That happens. This is why LTO is the standard, because it does not slide off the side of the tape as it does on 1/4-inch 8mm stuff. So point being, you make sure that you get your recovery media and you mount it. You get it ready, because we're going to start doing some stuff shortly. You need to start assessing the damage of what's happened on the system. So what do we do here? Well, we're in a bit of a fact-finding mode here now. You should look at your QZLS server, QZLS file, and QZLS file T jobs. What are those? Well, QZLS server, that's your net server job, right? That's your server job. Your QZLS file and QZLS file T jobs are your client connection jobs. One is single-threaded, one is multi-threaded. When you go in there, you're going to look for suspicious behavior. Don't worry, there's going to be a lot of it. There's going to be a ton of it. What are you going to find? repeated connections. You're going to see connections coming from the same IP address or same users, directory and object changes, so on and so forth. You're going to see a lot of information in there. That's good. I would rather more information than not enough information, for sure. You're going to want to look at things like who owns that object. Okay. Remember I mentioned what happens during a ransomware attack. An object is deleted, or copied. The old one's discarded, and then the new one is there encrypted. It's a brand new object. So who owns the object? Okay. Do a work link, put an 8 on the object. See who's the new owner. That's your culprit, or that's one of your culprits. Keep writing down, because you don't know how far this thing is spread internally on the laptop and PC network. Identifying where these things are coming in is priority 1. If you have a guest profile in use, good luck, because everything is going to be marked as owned by the guest profile. Another reason why it's a bad idea to use guest profiles. In Windows, it's kind of the same thing. You're going to look at who owns that object or who created the object. Work with your network team to ensure that they're aware of what you're doing, and vice versa, because if they spot other user profiles, you can get a list together and figure out who are the problem users. Then isolate those computers. It's not IBM related, of course, but what you're doing is segregating your network into consumable chunks, cleaning and ensuring that they are okay in the future. So if you identify who they are, you can make actions on them and protect other parts of your infrastructure that may not have been compromised yet, hopefully. At this point, you want to get your feds involved. So you have a crime scene on your hands. Remember when I said just mount the backup tape? You do not overwrite a crime scene. You don't destroy a crime scene. That's like going into a murder. There's a murder investigation in progress, and you come in with balloons filled with glitter and start throwing them everywhere. Yeah, good job. That's the equivalent of coming into a federal crime scene and then saying, "Yeah, we'll just do a restore of that directory or whatever." You're overriding the evidence. You don't want to do that. So just be very careful what you do. You want to talk to the appropriate people. Now, if you call one of 3, if you're in the United States, I'll do Canada first because I'm Canadian. We call the Canadian Center for Cybersecurity. That's it. We have 1 entity. You folks in the United States have 3. I should have put one in here for the UK. I'll do that for the next one. So in the US, you contact either the FBI, Secret Service, or CISA. Okay, you contact either one of those. They will notify the other 2. The appropriate entity, depending on industry, what have you, will call you back. So it may be the Secret Service, maybe the FBI, maybe CISA. It doesn't really matter. I don't care at that point. They're going to want to talk to you. They will want a lot of information. Now, I had this conversation yesterday when I talked to the fellow that got breached. And I said, "Hey, well, did you call the Canadian Center for Cybersecurity?" And they said, "No. The security company we contracted to help clean this up said they would do that." Okay, that's not their job. That's your job. All right, this is your business. You should report this, not them. Don't leave it up to them, because half the time when I hear that people have done that, they don't. So make sure that you do, because you cannot guarantee that they're going to do their job. You control what you can control. So we have not recovered anything yet. We still have, as I said, a crime scene. We can review logs on the system. This is most definitely a big requirement for having a security audit journal collecting decent things. Okay, if you do not have the security audit journal running and collecting a reasonable amount of information, that could be problematic. I've never seen federal authorities ask for any less than 60 days worth of logs. Okay, so if you don't have a security audit journal, do yourself a favor. You think you don't, do a display sec aud, DSPSECAUD, and just see what comes up. And if you've got pretty much blanks on that screen, you might want to just reach out, and I'll give you some good advice on how to add that to it. You recover when you're told it's okay to recover. Unless you can isolate and copy a crime scene with flash copy, for instance. And I've seen that where a customer has been compromised by a malware attack, and they do flash copy every day. So what did they do? they just powered down their partition that was destroyed, and or sorry, not powered down. They segregated it, so they effectively unplugged it virtually, left it in a restricted state, and then they brought up their flash partition. Now they're back in business. Okay, good. They were down for 8 hours, give or take. And now they've preserved their crime scene for anybody who wants to come and look at it. Plus, they have a place where they can look and understand where the guy come from, what hole did they get in on the new system that they just brought up, the flash copy, gold standard copy from yesterday. Net server is off. Right, they're not letting that happen again. So net server is off, but the system is functional. Their business is running, albeit in a less than perfect capacity, especially if they use net server. They might need to dance and do some other things. They have bigger problems on their hands. But for the average company who does not have flash copy, you recover when you're told it's okay to recover, when they're done looking at your system. You can rebuild another partition from your last save 21 and try to go from there. That's great. Whatever you want to do to move forward, you can go right ahead, but you must preserve what you have in place. So what are we recovering? Depends, right? So it's a root directory share, probably a scratch install. So I'm going to want to save 21, and I'm going to lick operating system, restore 21, so on and so forth. Then you're back up. If you have isolated damage, that's much easier to at least protect yourself from more damage, because, hey, I only have one share and it's to this minor directory. Who cares about it? Okay, fine. We're going to stop sharing that directory, and we can turn off net server because we only share one thing. It's not important. So let's just turn it off, leave the evidence where it is, bring the system up completely, and I can continue on. Okay, big deal. I may not even need to recover anything in that directory. If it was that, discardable to begin with, why am I going to waste time recovering? So it really depends. I say that average downtime event from malware is measured in weeks, not hours. Okay, you're talking a long time, potentially. I can give you examples. One customer, 2 years ago, not December, November timeframe. This is maybe 2022. They had a Power 8. They had a system that was about 5.5 terabytes, and they had a massive ransomware attack that crippled the system. It didn't destroy it. It just caused a heck of a lot of various damage. And they did not have a save 21. Their last save 21 was the save 21 they took before they migrated to the Power 8. Why? Well, it's because they were running on LTO2. And LTO2 is 20 years old, give or take, in terms of speed. It was an external LTO2 drive with multiple tapes, and it took, roughly speaking, 26, 27 hours to do a save 21 on their system with an LTO2 drive. So it took a lot of time. So instead of spending, I don't know, you can go to the used market and buy an LTO6 drive for $1,000, give or take. Who knows? It's not that expensive. You can, instead of doing that, they just decided we're not going to do save 21s. And okay, so be it. So we ended up loaning them an LTO7 in order to get a good system save after we cleaned up the mess. It was just painful. They were down, roughly speaking, in some capacity. Their business was affected for about 6 weeks. They had some stuff up, but they had a number of different remote locations that were all compromised. And that is very much destructive to an entire business, not just your systems. But if you're down in terms of weeks, let's just say you can't do EDI for 2 weeks. I come from manufacturing. Man, that's just a dagger in the heart. For any manufacturing company, if you can't do EDI, you can't ship, you can't, take orders, you can't, do orders. That's pretty much a killer right there. So make sure that you're properly protecting yourself because your downtime may not be a couple of hours. It may be a couple of days. It may be a couple of weeks, and it may just put your company out of business altogether. So just be careful out there. And that is all I have to say about this topic. I've got 5 minutes left. I hope there's some questions. Oh, there's a few. Yay. I'll try to go in reverse order. Hey, Steve. Have you ever seen authority collection on the root cause issues, i.e. performance? Everything going anywhere in the IFS has to go through the root directory. You are 100% correct. I would not recommend putting authority collection on the root for an extended period of time. So if you want to see who's doing something on your system, if you have a root directory share, let her run for a day, go through the authority collection logs, okay, so SQL, and then the next day start a new collection, delete the old, so you're not accumulating massive amounts of data. Take your, collect your data, pull your information with SQL, slice and dice it, delete it, start it again, move on. Yeah, it will definitely cause performance problems if you put a authority collection on the root and leave it there on a very busy system for days and weeks on end. It's not something you want to do. So if you're going to do it in a controlled state. Would you suggest meeting all the recommendations in the CIS benchmark? If so, does that cover all or most of your recommendations? I don't see a problem with that at all. I'm not sure if it covers all or most of my recommendations, but I can review that for sure. I have my own because it's like that. It was an old movie I saw, something like we do it because we're good at it. We're good at it because we do it all the time. So I have a different perspective. I have practical application experience on this. So I would say that any type of formalized list of benchmarking good advice that you want to put in, like people talk about PCI compliance. We don't need to be PCI compliant, blah, blah, blah. Doesn't mean it's not a damn good checklist. Like, it's very good. So you may want to not just look at a number of different philosophies. You may want to take a few from a bunch of different places and work on that, depending on your environment, especially. Let's see. Did you say that super users should not have access to file shares? Yes, I did say that. And I'll say that developers should not have special authorities either. And I will have that fight with anybody who wants to have it with me. Somebody says, let's see. Like ours. What was it? It's a hijacker shooting gallery. I remember that. Yeah, it was a hijacker shooting gallery. That's right. Doesn't breaching the IBM I require knowledge of the IBM I and its operating system? Depending on what you mean by breach and depending on what you mean by knowledge, I suppose. So this is not a pen testing session, but I would challenge, I would suggest that I am not the be all and end all for IBM I security at all. That's somebody like Carol Woodbury who wrote the book on this. Frank Zappa had a great explanation of how he does guitar solos. He said he's something like he has a fundamental understanding of the mechanics of the guitar as an instrument, and he has a length of time that he can paint. Okay, I thought that was a beautiful explanation of how to fill that time. And I would argue that somebody who has a decent understanding of IBM I security can do a lot of damage very quickly, which is why I've never been stopped in elevating my authority on a pen test and why I'm 60% effective in breaking into systems in a black box test where I do not know the username and passwords available to me. With that being said, I would argue that a bad actor with enough time and enough Google can get the knowledge to be able to cause a lot of damage relatively quickly. I don't win on pen tests because I'm very, very smart. I win on pen tests because I take advantage of human behavior, period. People leave default passwords out there. They have profiles that can be hijacked. They have help desk personnel that when I call the help desk and demand a password reset or I come hat in hand begging for one, I'm often successful to do that because people like to help people. I have a session on this. It's basically a psychology session. I take advantage of people's goodwill. in doing security. So that's how I win pen tests. Frank Zappa, hell yeah. Okay, I think we're at the end of this. That's a good timer came down. I like the one thing about this webinar utility is that it gives you the nice little ticker on the bottom and tells you how much time you have left. It's fabulous. So, hey, Brooke, welcome.
Perfect. You ended right on time. All right. Thank you, Steve. That was awesome. For everyone else, we've got networking hour next. So we've got 3 different rooms: general admin, security, and hardware. So you can choose whichever one of those you want to attend. This is much more of a discussion. So you can turn on your camera, talk to other attendees, speakers, ask questions, all of that kind of stuff. So you guys are good to go. Again, the slides will be available. We will be sending out a post-event survey come like Thursday or Friday this week. And so once you fill that out, you'll be redirected to all of the slides. And then the recordings for these sessions will be available within 24 hours. So should be good there. Thank you all.